Welcome to Emotion Chips, where we talk about the real reason everything happens for a reason. I'm your host, Charlie Carroll, along with my magnificent co-host, Mallory Redmond.
Okay.
You like how I did that?
I love it.
I had to throw the M in there so I
I'm
could
with
come
you.
back and a little Hebrew poetry here.
I'm with you.
Grab the in Mallory on the backside. How are you, Mal?
Yeah, I'm great. I'm really great.
You're ready to go, I can tell.
I am so ready to go. I feel like it's humid.
It is, yes. Much more
You
humid
might
than
not
it has
feel.
been.
Yeah, 96%. I looked it up.
Oh. It almost feels like Florida here in Ohio, in light of raining at night and then a little sunshine and then a little rain.
Yes, it's hard to keep up with it all.
The humidity is here, but actually the humidity is a good thing when it comes to COVID-19, ladies and gentlemen.
I've heard that from you.
From 14%, well, you can look it up. That's
I believe it.
That's science stuff. It goes from 14% chance of spreading when humidity is above 70% to much greater when the humidity is below 70%. So
Okay.
so
it's a good day.
Yeah, little scientific research there. So that is good. What are you laughing at?
That is good. We got our scientific research in.
I'm very conscious.
He's conscious about his shirt. You
Because
can tune in and you can watch the video of this. And
Yes.
he's self-conscious about his shirt. It's a new shirt.
It is a new
I
shirt.
haven't seen it. Okay.
I have not worn it yet, but I bought it a couple of months ago. And right before we came online, ladies and gentlemen, Mallory told me my belly was showing.
Well, it was just like there was a gap between the buttons, and I figured you didn't want everybody seeing your belly. Although I know that you're taking some steps in your health journey to shed
Yes.
maybe some weight. So I didn't know if you were wanting to go for that look in light of your.
That's very observant of you, and I appreciate your willingness to say something.
Do you want to start over right now?
No, I don't. We're going to keep rolling. I am addressing my metabolic health.
Yeah.
That all health comes back to and can be reflected in your metabolism, in how your body or your body's metabolism is interacting with the life or lack thereof that you put in your body.
Which means you're doing. Do you want to say what you're doing?
I have a specific approach to what I am eating, where I'm trying to eat 70% healthy fats, so like avocados and good butter from Europe, and then 25% protein and 5% carbs. Does that equal 100?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it does. But you feel great because here's the truth of the matter, and then we'll dive into today's content, which talking about some really good stuff. Your brain can feed on one of two things, glycogen or ketones. And 99% of the world, maybe not 99, but very close to it, their brain has been conditioned to feed off of glucose or glycogen. Mm-hmm. And that's a carb-oriented thing or a sugars-oriented thing. And a lot of people would argue that before food was manufactured, that because people had to grow their vegetables, which are not high in sugars or carbs, and then ate protein through meat, that a lot of people their brain ran off of ketones, or at least not as much carb intake. And so the rise of manufacturing our food has led to people constantly having to refuel through carbs. And so I like to think of our bodies as fires. And carbs are like kindling. So you have to put a lot more on a lot more often in order to keep that fire going, whereas protein and healthy fats take longer to burn. And it's a healthier, cleaner burn. And so if you're a thinker, right, your mind is always going. Your brain uses about 25% of your energy. Your brain, for the size of it, uses more energy than any of your other organs. And so if you're a thinker, that's probably why you crave sweets and sugar, because your mind is always going and it needs that glycogen. Mm-hmm. And so a way to change that is make it feed off of ketones, which basically means you can get your body to feed off of fat and use fat for fuel versus sugar and carbs. And so it's about a 4 to 5 day switch where you turn your system over. And Some people are getting this through intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
When your face feels a little bit warm, like you have a low-grade fever, when you get into the fasting state, you start to use ketones and burn fat for fuel. And so this is an approach where you do 70% healthy fats, 25% protein, which you can get that through vegetables. It doesn't have to be all meat. And then 5% carbs. It's setting your system up to basically burn fat for fuel instead of carbs for fuel. And if you've never done it before, it's life-changing.
Yeah. So my husband did it a year or two ago.
Yeah.
It was super revealing because I would help him kind of figure out how many carbs are in this and this. And it's like a stick of gum has gum. Like it, just things that you don't even think about that a slice of apple, like a carbs. I mean, apples have a good amount of carbs.
Yeah. I mean, carbs.
I just had no idea.
Carbs are everywhere.
Yeah.
And a lot of us, well, they are good. But the cool thing about it is, a lot of people would call this keto because you're trying to produce ketones, which is fine. There's just a healthy way to do it, right? You don't have to eat all meat and all protein. You should be doing 70% healthy fats, which you can look up or Google healthy fats and get some ideas. But your brain absolutely loves that because your brain wants healthy fats, and it just gives you so much energy. It puts the brakes on disease in your life because it just squashes inflammation. That a lot of carbs are processed in a way that it gets gooey, especially your breads and grains, because we mass manufacture grains in this country. Like European grains are different because they don't use a lot of the same steroids or fertilizers that we use here. And so people have eaten bread and grains for forever, and we never had the issues that we have today. And that's a combination of many things that we could talk about on another podcast. But if
you know what one of my favorite smells is?
Bread.
But like specifically walking into a Subway. And I don't want a
That's
Subway.
That's the craziest thing.
I don't want a Subway sandwich. Like
sure.
I don't really like their sandwiches, but the smell of their bread. Yeah. Oof.
I recently tried to make a version because I was out and about and wanted some protein and had Subway for the first time in maybe 10 years.
You recently ate Subway?
I did.
Wow. You could have just made a lot of money off of me betting.
Betting you that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. There we go.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes. But if you want to look up a resource for converting your system over to burning clean, suppressing inflammation, really turning up the anti-aging genes in your body, I would look up Fat for Fuel by Dr. McCullough. You can do that. I don't agree with everything Dr. McCullough says or believes, but guess what? Nobody believes everything that I do or say, and
you don't have to.
Nor should we.
Nope.
Which was a lot of the podcast last week. So if you want that resource, Fat for Fuel, it's a great book, even has a cookbook to convert your system over to burn and run more cleanly with a lot of energy. Jumping back into the content from last week, just talking about science, one of the things that Dr. McCullough says in the beginning of this book, Fat for Fuel, is that science is never not finished. There was another word and I just literally lost it. Science is never... Do you have the word for me?
Finished?
We'll say finished and then it will come to me.
Not finished.
But it's cool because he understands that science is a process where you uncover the truth, as we were saying last week. And I thought this is super relevant in light of today. President Trump is to sign an executive order on fact checking with social media. Did you see this in the news?
I've seen ish.
This is big time stuff yesterday and today that he will be signing a presidential order or an executive order with social media because the head of integrity, real position at Twitter,
wow,
who's in charge of now fact checking people's tweets,
One person?
Well, he's a head of a division, the integrity division at Twitter.
How does that even work? You look at hashtag, like keywords or something?
It's a good question,
okay.
but
I need more information.
Recently this week he was censored, or they threw a fact check on President Trump about something. I don't even know what he said, and his beef with it is CNN is the source of truth that said President Trump was not being honest. Now, I don't even know the topic. That's not the point. Mm-hmm. But President Trump's point, which ties into our episode last week, is that, whoa, this is just another person saying that their opinion is greater than my opinion, which really comes back to settled. Science is never settled.
I was going to say, I Googled it. Science is never settled.
You know, the guys in my brain between my ears are just getting a little older. They're slower.
Yeah, they move a little slow.
To get back to the file folder and back up to the front just takes a little.
Patient.
Yeah, science is never settled is what Dr. McCullough says in his book, Fat for Fuel. But with science never being settled, what we were trying to say last week, and I just thought more about it as I was cutting my grass again this week.
Okay.
Is that truth is something that can be known, and science is how we get there. Mm-hmm. And I think some of what has irritated people in the past is when people act as if faith-based people are less serious about truth than those who, quote unquote, pursue and promote science. The Bible is full of science. Now, if you don't understand how to interpret it, which, boy, are there those out there that are applying principles from 2,000 years ago, telling people to do that today, which we'll get into some of that here in a minute, you run into trouble.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that truth and science have to come together, and truth exists outside of any one given person. Truth is something that can be known and verified, but we use science to get there. And so I kind of laugh when people, like hint like, oh, you're a faith person. Eventually you'll get to where I am, where I stand on and stand beside science.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, truth and science work together, and it's a never-ending journey. And it was highlighted here in this fact checker, which is something that more than one social media platform is developing, where they are going to say and have the right to say whether or not Mallory is right or wrong with what she's saying based on someone else's opinion, mm-hmm. which, again, the nature of truth is that it can be known, but it's not always known on the first go-around, and our perspective or experience can severely limit what we know and understand to be true.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing, people. Because you go on social media and people say some pretty wild things.
Sure.
And so let's just take a moment here to use our platform to say, don't get your news from social media.
Sure. Yeah.
Do your research. Because the fact checking, I mean, where does it stop, right?
Sure.
Because it gets into censorship and blah, blah, blah.
But that's what, I mean, that's what we're trying to say. It can't be personal.
Right.
Go ahead.
Let people say what they're going to say on social media, but just know that you might want to use some other resources other than the Twitter or Facebook.
The Twitter.
An
example is it's very interesting. And I was wondering about this as General Flynn was scheduled. So for those of you that don't know, I have been a part of a security consulting firm for a long time, ever since I was born, really. Mm-hmm. And intelligence is one of the things that a service that we provide to our clients. So we're interacting on a semi-regular basis with people from the FBI and Attorney General's office and DEA and all of those organizations. And one of the things that I was wondering about as all of it was unfolding around, 2017, where the Obama administration, which includes like the FBI and people he appointed, where they were investigating this collusion and promoting a narrative is what it looks like now. I was wondering how they were thinking about the fact that when President Trump took over, he can appoint and reappoint his own people. And so my thought is, I hope they're really right or accurate with what they're doing, because the retaliation is going to be pretty crazy. And so now I think what we see coming out more and more is that there was some party or political bias in that whole Russian investigation. And it's like, now the people that were supposed to be the ones protecting us, like Director Comey at the FBI, seems as if somehow he got talked into bringing more of his opinion into it, and some of what we thought to be true wasn't true. Now, I'm not going to take sides, because it doesn't matter, because at any given time, you have it happening on both sides of the aisle. That's not the point. The point is, as human beings, we want the buck to stop with someone, and we want to be able to look at someone that has a uniform on or an elected position and say, oh, well, they're a judge or they're a police officer, so I can trust that they're going to be truthful and honest and not use information and bend it for their good or the good of their party.
Right.
And that's not the case.
Right. Well, it's kind of like what we were saying last time of, it's so, we want things to be so crystal clear. Like everything is, people are in one camp or they're in another. Things are, for lack of a better term, black or white, right? And so to say like all judges, all teachers, all police officers, all politicians, whatever, they are all good and right and full of integrity. It's unfortunately, truly, unfortunately, it's just not like that. That's just not how. That's not how it works, and we continue to see that.
Well, I think it's wanting. I think it's an attempt to have peace. That's almost a lazy attempt, where we want to be able to look at a certain office or a certain party and have them. We see this in poverty a lot, that people are willing to give money and gloves and even go volunteer their time periodically at a soup kitchen, but they don't want to be responsible. That they don't want to be the one that someone depends upon. In a lot of cases, because it's uncomfortable. I think this is true when it comes to what is all over the news this week with George Floyd. Have you seen the video?
No. And parts of it, it's just, no. I've seen photos. I've seen photos of like kind of screenshots of what happened.
What it reminded me of was in, I believe, 2004, and I won't remember his name, which I can look it up. The contractor that was a truck driver was captured in Iraq, and they were going to decapitate him on video, basically just to tell the Americans to get out of the Middle East. And my business partner, I came into what was Carolina Indoor Soccer. I had started a training facility down there in the Carolinas, and I came into the training facility, and he was in the office, and he had the video pulled up on his computer, and I watched a part of that, which was absolutely unbearable. That's what it reminded me of. I watched it last night, and here you have George Floyd, who, at least from the video, you could not see him resisting arrest. And even if he was, my whole life has been spent around law enforcement and police officers. I know very well what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. There were plenty of police officers there. There was absolutely no need to keep him on the ground and the officer's knee in his neck. The officer was purposefully doing what he was doing to him, not necessarily to kill him. I can't make that accusation, but to put him in pain and to humiliate him for some reason, whether he smarted off or whatever it was, obviously completely unjustified. But that's what it reminded me of. It reminded me of the video that I saw in 2004, how inhumane it was with the way he was being treated. And I put myself in that situation, And I honestly think I would have gotten myself in trouble.
What do you mean? In whose situation?
Where all of this is going down. So there's some bystanders.
Oh, so just being there
that are videotaping it,
Mm-hmm.
which they all have their phones out, and they're recording this.
Right.
And we'll get into this, but to show you how wrapped up the officers are in this situation, their adrenaline is going so much that they can't even think logically that here are all of these people videotaping this. And they keep saying, like, dude, let him up. Like, he can't breathe. Mm-hmm. I mean, one guy is there and obviously has some experience in martial arts and jiu-jitsu. He's like, hey, you're doing this. The guy can't breathe. You're going to kill him. And the officers aren't doing anything. Yeah. I mean, they continue. The one officer continues who has been investigated multiple times. And, listen, we've got to be mature enough to talk about these things without, people want to take a side, one side or another, right? You're either Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter. You can side with the pursuit of truth using science to get to justice. There is no such thing as justice if truth is relative, right? Getting back into last week's content. And that's the problem with people saying, live your truth. Well, if living my truth means I get to discriminate and be a racist and treat people that are different than me, whether it's the color of their skin, their education, what part of town they're from, any of those things, if that justifies me living my truth, which is picking on them or enforcing my position on them, like, it doesn't work. Yeah. There is no such thing as justice if truth doesn't exist. And that's why we're beating it up and saying, like, no, like, truth can be known and we've got to use science to get there. Right? And so, going back to saying that I think I would have gotten myself in trouble watching this video, like, I literally, watching this video last night, thought to myself, like, I started thinking through what I would have done. Mm-hmm. I probably would have, I would have gotten maced pretty good and probably stunned, the stun gun,
which is
the taser.
Probably what they should have been doing rather than, you wouldn't have gotten a knee in your neck.
No.
In my opinion.
Well, I'm saying that if I was standing by watching, like, I don't think I could allow that to happen. And you see these people start to step toward him, and the one officer who has also been investigated in the past for aggression is touching them and pushing them back. Yeah. Now, I understand what a police officer would say, like, well, we can't have people charging us. But you have to take everything in context. You are using unnecessary force after the guy's hands are already behind his back. He's already locked up, laying face down. His nose is bleeding. And probably the tip of the iceberg and the most disturbing thing about the video is at some point in time, toward the end of the video, it's a 5-minute video, he blacks out. He's out. And a first responder who also has her phone out and she's recording the whole thing says, like, he is not conscious. Take his pulse. Mm-hmm. And they're not doing anything. Mm-hmm. And so after a minute or two of someone saying, like, this guy is not conscious anymore, the paramedic shows up, and the way they roll him over to get him onto the bed is like as inhumane as you can get. Like, you would think we're in a third world country. Now, I could get into it all day and talk about having been someone. If you listen to, I don't remember what episode we talk about me getting locked up.
Oh yeah, I don't either.
I
don't even know what episode that we didn't even say what episode this is. 18. Let's start from the top.
Here we go. But
yes, you were locked up.
I mean, having been in that environment before, the moment you lose everyone listen, the moment you lose your wallet and your cell phone, right? And I'm talking to you. The moment you lose your wallet and your cell phone, in most situations, you might as well be in a third world country because you have no rights, you have no name. They go way out of their way to make you look like everyone else. And it doesn't matter what you've accomplished or how you've served your community. The majority, and we'll talk about this in how we apply this information today, so there's some sort of benefit from it. The moment you lose your identity, you are treated in a way that has nothing to do with getting you to be a different person than you were that got you in that situation. And having been in that situation, inside behind those bars and outside the majority of my life and helping people that try to re-enter community, often because our correction system went private in most cases, and profit becomes a thing there, the people that are working, not all, but no different than those officers, just because someone has a badge on doesn't mean they're healthy. Right. And it comes back to what we're saying. Like, we want to look at someone and say, oh, because they're wearing a badge, they're no longer a human being. They're this force for good. Police officers, doctors, lawyers, attorneys, there is not a person on this planet that is not vulnerable to selfishness, anger, being burnt out, rage, discrimination. Like, it's a part of being a human being.
Yeah, I was talking, my brother is in the process of going to police academy and becoming a police officer. And we were talking actually just this morning, some family members and I, about the length of time that it takes to become like a lawyer, let's say, all of the years that you have to go to school, versus police academy. Like, it's quite brief. And the thing with police academy is it's very physically strenuous, from what I understand. But it seems to me that there is an element missing of like anger management and these sort of tapping into the emotional part of the work that, you are given a level of power when you become a police officer that can be used for good or for evil.
Sure.
I mean, it really is like a Hollywood film that we see. I mean, this is real life. And that's why the videos are very difficult for me to watch, because this isn't on a set. Like, that was an actual man who the world can watch take his last breaths.
Yeah.
And so I think, even the conversations that we have here are so important for people, particularly in that hold a level of power, because the awareness, I mean, that seems like what we always go back to when we're talking about an emotion ship. It's like, well, then what do we do with this? What do we do with it? And it's just like having the awareness of what you're feeling in your body. Like, I'm so curious what people are feeling in their body right now as we talk about this, because for me, like, my heart is racing and I feel a little nauseous, and like, there are things that are being activated when talking about this. And so I think for people who have, they're in a leadership role or they have a level of power in their work, like that's not fluffy stuff just to sit through. Like, these are actual things that people can be utilizing in their work in order to create a truly peaceful environment for all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, so he was 6'7". George was 6'7". Former high school tight end. From what I have read, he was a good football player, a good tight end, and they called him the gentle giant. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Obviously more will come out. I think it was forgery.
That's what I heard.
Is what, and I've watched a couple of tapes of where they, get him out of his car, all of that. I think one of the things that we are going to have to continue to wake up to and understand is that the world has continued to evolve. And a lot of our social systems have been built in the 60s and 70s. And there is so much that has changed that we have yet to apply to our food system, our health system, and our corrections system, or our justice system, that we have evolved. And now as a police officer, it's not enough for it to be a black or white issue. You have to understand the why behind the what they are doing. Hold on a second. We're living in an unprecedented time. So from what I know, again, George worked for a restaurant and lived or rented a space from the restaurant owner.
Okay.
It wouldn't be hard for me to see why he would steal in this time and situation with what we're going through. I'm not saying that stealing is right, but I understand it, right? And it shouldn't have led to him losing his life.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. If you have an opportunity, it's funny to call it an opportunity. He should have been given the opportunity to lose his wallet and his cell phone and be taken to jail, right? Like he didn't even get there.
Sure.
I mean, that the prison system, the jails, it's all very broken, but he didn't even get to be in that broken system.
Yeah.
He was a victim of the brokenness that comes before that brokenness.
Yeah. It's having been around police officers and respecting police officers my whole life. Who I feel bad for are the police officers that day in, day out show up, and when they want to retaliate and they want to be violent when they don't need to, but they don't.
Right.
That's who I feel bad for.
Yeah.
Obviously, I feel bad for George Floyd and his family. There's a lot to say about that, and we'll continue to talk about that. But in the same way, some priests have taken advantage of innocent children. That doesn't make every priest a pedophile or bad. That often it is the offices that are most needed, that are targeted by evil to do the most damage, because if you can pollute the sources that can do the most good, then you have this compounding factor that really puts humanity in a bad place. And so that I wrote a blog post years ago, and I don't even know if it's up. My platform has changed so many times. But everything but evil was the title. And it's like, this stuff happens, and we talk about everything but evil. And evil will hide behind a uniform or a title or a position of authority. That's where it hangs out. That's what it loves, is positions of authority. Because if evil, which biblically is personified through Lucifer, if evil can hide and get you to blame a face or blame a color or blame a party, it means it gets to go on pulling the strings and doing its thing, and it never gets addressed or corrected because we're always blaming it on the manifestation versus the root cause.
Yeah, right. So true. And I think just the day and age that we live, Will Smith said that racism is not getting worse, it's getting filmed. And so,
yeah.
I agree.
Great quote.
The things that happened to George Floyd on Monday, that's not new. It's that we all have access to see it, even though it happened in a different city.
Sure.
And so I think that's true with, cell phone videos and social media, and we talk about this a lot. Like, the internet allows us to have access to so much information, and therefore, like, the kind of the pulling back of the curtain to evil
100%.
and what's happening. So
100%. And the thing about it is, too often, we've had this in religious circles, in Christian circles, we've had this mentality that I need to be saved and then I need to save them, but me saving them has to do with me giving them information or preaching at them, and then they need to make the decision in and of themselves to be a better person, when that wasn't Jesus' message. Jesus' message was that there was no them, it's us, and he was going to be with people.
What do you think Jesus would have, you talk about the bystanders who weren't really doing anything, or they were just, they were doing something. Filming it actually has created, it's created the conversation, which I think is helpful, but they weren't actually jumping in, and like you said, you felt like you would have done. What do you think Jesus would have done if he were watching what happened to George Floyd?
It's a really good question. I think he definitely would have walked toward him, right? Like, I think he would have physically moved toward him and done something to stop it. Right now, Jesus doesn't stop everything that's evil in the world, because there's a level of participation on our part, and that's really what our responsibility is supposed to be. That we're partners that walk out and move toward the darkness. Yeah,
I think that is such a vision, right? To even, I mean, like I said, I didn't watch the video, but I've seen photos of it, and just to envision Jesus being there. I'm curious, two things. I am curious what the race of most of the people were that were standing there.
Well, you can see an African American gentleman, and the woman is Caucasian. That is saying she's the first responder. It's inner city. It appears to be downtown Minneapolis. And again, one of the things that I'm an advocate for, and I incorporated into that TED Talk, was just the idea of the church lost its heart when social services became the responsible party for taking care of our neighbor. And you're never going to put people on the payroll and get justice served. That has to come as we all live into it. And instead of saying my truth, it's what is true and how do we all pursue it. And when we disagree, how do we promote the other person, which is called love? How do we put the other person's needs in front of our own?
Yeah.
But even being a white male, I have been in environments with police officers where they didn't know me, or they didn't know what I was doing, or whatever. And because of how stressed out they are, or because they were raised in a part of the country or a community that was biased or racist, they get squirrely really fast. And that's happened to me, where you can tell they've had a bad day, and you now are going to be the object of their frustration. I hate doing that to my children, right? Yeah. I know when I do that to my kids,
Ugh, yeah.
when they become the object of my frustration. Well, it's pretty nasty when somebody has a badge on and stands behind that badge. Yeah. And so, not to get too far off on a political issue, but when you talk about the Second Amendment, right? Like really getting into the Second Amendment, it's the right to bear arms against your government. That's the context of the Second Amendment. And so I'm not, though I've grown up in law enforcement and I'm very comfortable around automatic weapons, I've fired many of them, all of that. People will say, well, I'm okay with people having guns, but everyone doesn't need to have an AR. Well, okay, that's fine. Maybe we need to have a civilized conversation about this. But the theory behind it is, if government can have these high-powered firearms, the Second Amendment was not to protect yourself necessarily from an intruder that wants to steal your TV, but to protect yourself from a government that positions themselves in a way that they want to control you versus serve you. And I told you before we got on the air today that I was reading an article in the New York Times from one of the directors at Yale Medical, who said that he thinks the further we get away from this, and he actually published this originally in March, so he came out on the front side and is still holding his position that our response in isolating will be worse when you factor
response to COVID.
Our response in isolating when it comes to COVID-19, factoring in the economy, people missing cancer screenings, doctor's appointments, all of those things, our response, in his opinion, will be worse than the actual virus itself. And so it's very interesting to see how different governors responded and said, nope, you're not going to even garden on your own property. No, you can't even buy your own seeds, right? Like, very interesting to think about that. I just had a situation where I own a property inside a building with a landlord here in town, and the landlord did not like something that we had done, and said very quickly, he shot back a fiery email and said, I am in charge of 75% of the homeowners association. You will not do this. You will not do this. You will not do this. And if so, I will purposefully raise homeowners association fees and make it difficult on you.
Oh, okay.
And my response was to the rest of the group, I hope everyone sees how quick Mr. Professional here, when he felt like he was being infringed upon or not listening, how quick he jumped behind his authority, and instead of being a human being, became a position that said, I have this authority, and whether you like it or not, I will make your life miserable if in any way I think that you're not listening to me, which really it's just, he's an insecure weenie. Am I allowed to say that on the podcast?
You just did.
Okay, yeah.
You're the host.
Right. Yes. But here's the point, and why I talk about the Second Amendment. The founders wrote that to protect people from their government. Now, I'm not an anti-government guy. We have the best justice system in the world. We do. Does it need to be improved?
Yes.
No doubt about it. And we can talk about that here in a second. No doubt about it. It needs to be improved. It's antiquated and overrun and uneducated in a lot of ways. We need to pray for and support and vote in people that have the right amount of character and professional experience to help update our approach to fostering and growing mankind. Not profit, mankind. And I'm not against profit either. But profit needs to be a result, not a pursuit.
Yeah.
And so all I'm saying is very quickly, those in positions of power, to include police officers, can use their authority to try to control you versus serve you. Are there times that people need to be controlled because they're on something or they themselves are out of control? Of course. Mm-hmm. Of course. But you can clearly see if you watch the video that you have unhealthy officers who have been questioned on multiple occasions throughout the years as to whether or not they were healthy enough to make the right decision when under pressure.
Right. Yep. And so our role, taking it back to us or someone who might be listening, where do we even begin?
Well, I said all of that and mentioned that former blog post of everything but evil, right? We'll talk about Democrats and we'll talk about Republicans and we'll talk about, Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. And we'll talk about
Both is true, by the way.
What's that?
Both
yeah,
is true.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Both Black and Blue Lives Matter. Of course, equally, right? But it comes back to, we have to address the fact that evil exists, and each and every one of us not only have a responsibility to avoid evil or to own our actions when we accidentally or intentionally promote it, but actually the Hebrew word for peace, which is shalom, is a double-sided coin that basically means I'm not only going to try to do my best to not promote evil and own my actions when I accidentally do or intentionally do because I was tired or hungry or had a bad day, but I'll actually go on the offensive to make sure that evil is not expanding without any resistance or pushback when I'm around. Yeah. And so it just comes back to there is a fallacy in this idea of live your truth, man, because where's the border to that? How do you grow and foster a community if everyone's allowed to live their truth and their truth means discrimination? Well, they shouldn't be allowed to have that truth. That's not the way it works. We can't be saying to each other, well, you can have this one and I can't. There has to be a pursuit of that which adheres to the facts, and that which adheres to the facts has to, in the nature of it, be outside of us. It's not inside of us, because you know that we all change. And that our desires change. And when you're 15, like I had a conversation with my son last night, what you think is right and good at 15 isn't necessarily that accurate.
Right.
And heck, I'm 41, and I'm looking back on things and saying, ooh, I didn't get that right. Yeah. And so it comes back to pursuing life, pursuing light, which also means we're standing up and standing against darkness and evil.
Yeah, I think that's I appreciate what you say about just sort of like the two steps in like promoting shalom.
Sure.
I put something on social media yesterday about what has happened with George Floyd, and I was very I didn't want to. Right. Sure. Like I didn't want to do it because I like to kind of just stay neutral, and I know I know just when you push publish, like it's really easy to feel like, okay, well, I did my part then.
Sure.
Right? Like I've been a part of the conversation. I've like promoted the, just like the pursuit of justice for this person and this, the systemic racism. I brought this all to the forefront on my page. And so check, I'm done.
Sure.
And for me and my personality, like it takes a lot for me to put that out there, because I know there are people that want to push back and say like it wasn't about race and blah blah blah, and my opinion is that it is about race.
Sure.
And so
that's one of the areas that I think the evangelical church of the last 50 years has failed dramatically, and we are blind to the racism that exists in the church.
Oh yeah.
And primarily it was a result of the expansive communication and the telephone, and then the internet, and then also roads, transportation, where we could go out and build churches in the suburbs where everyone looked the same, had the same kind of job, had the same level of income. And you can feel the energy, the emotionship rising up, even when you just say that, that unfortunately we're not too many generations away from when African Americans specifically were slaves in this country.
No.
And again, I had a great grandmother who grew up with a housekeeper for the first part of her years that also did the cooking, that they loved and welcomed in as a family member. And it never would have been said slave. It was like an employee and a part of the family. And it was something where they remained friends for their whole life. It's not an all or nothing, right? But we still are not that far away in our country where a racist spirit exists. And if your first pivot when thinking about someone based on what they did with their behavior or something they said is, oh, they're black, right? Or oh, they're Asian. I would say that there is not a person on the planet, no different than selfishness, being tempted with selfishness or anger or hatred. There is not a person on the planet that is immune to having racist thoughts or entertaining racist thoughts and ideas. Yeah. And a failure of the North American church is that we have become pantheistic moralists, right? That say, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to live, but we have failed to move like Jesus toward people that do not look like us and people that are struggling with things that we don't struggle with.
Right. Oh my goodness. And that's why I said something on social media, is because I could feel my heartbeat like racing yesterday as I was just thinking about everything that had happened in Minneapolis. And to me, like, that is a prompt from the Holy Spirit. Like, that is just how I experience that. And so as a leader in a church specifically, it is of utmost importance to me that I speak out. Yeah. And people can love it or hate it. But the thing about social media is that I don't feel bad that I sign on to social media right now and everybody is talking about it. Sure. And there are people that get very irritated by that, but it's like, good. Like, at least this is the conversation. Whether you agree with it or not, I'm glad that we are talking about this. And if it makes you uncomfortable, you probably have some work to do, right?
Sure.
But it's then taking, and this is what I was saying earlier, of like, well, okay, I did my job. I brought this up on social media. It's then taking that out behind my, you talk about isolation with COVID-19. It's like, this conversation about racism and everything that happened in Minneapolis, isolation is particularly harmful here, right? Sure. Where you're all sitting behind your screen and you feel safe and you feel powerful and you feel strong and you feel like a, badass or whatever. Get out from behind your screen and actually like live what you are saying. Sure. And so that is my challenge to myself, is like, okay, I could put that out, and it took deep breaths, and I had my husband read what I wrote, and my mom, whatever. But then, like, now what? Like, now I have to go out and actually like live as if the words that I was saying are true. Yeah.
Well, I think the reason why people would see your post or listen to this episode and have their feathers ruffled is an inner guilt, right? That they have stood beside or stood on the sidelines and watched and haven't responded. Now, in fairness, the church has not done a good job in creating opportunities for people of different backgrounds and race to come together and have mutual pursuits. And so, again, it's we're not going to point the finger and say, well, this person's right and this person's wrong. And clearly in this situation, we can talk about the behavior that was not correct. But I'm saying when it comes to moving forward and how do we change this, let's seek what the truth is here. And the truth is justice and mercy and forgiveness, right? It's not, oh, well, it's this party's fault, or it's, that everybody in this group is wrong. Like, that's not the case.
And that's the thing. You talk about getting people into positions of authority, like in politics, who want to see actual justice, right? Who are not in it for their own personal gain. But then that's going to require us, the voters, to loosen our grip a little bit on the parties, right? And truly want to see, like, it's fine that there are different parts. I don't know. I don't really want to get into that, but truly want to see like the promotion of justice for all, and love and shalom in our society. And so I think that is going to require something of those of us who aren't in the positions of power to be okay with disagreements.
Sure.
As long as we can agree on, we want some peace in our nation.
Well, that's why you have to understand, and this is why we have this podcast, is when we say the real reason everything happens for a reason, it's getting down into the roots and the energy of the motivation that caused the action so that we can change it and really experience positive change in our own lives and throughout our communities. We are as healthy, or we can help the community in conjunction with our own health. And so it's putting your own mask on first and being willing, or even almost suspecting, that I probably have some blind areas in my life where I don't see myself completely accurately. Right? Like there are some things that I need to think about. An example, last year, or maybe 18 months ago, here we had some local officials that got busted for doing backdoor deals. And it was, I think, 4 individuals, and 3 of the 4 men were African American. And someone made some off the hand comment to me, like, oh, like, no coincidence here.
Big shock, or
type thing like that. And it's like, listen, the fallacy in that thinking is, when's the last time, if you're being honest, when's the last time you were deceptive? When's the last time you did something for your own family's gain that wasn't necessarily above board? Selfishness is not a temptation to any one particular culture. And why maybe it seems like one particular culture or race is doing it more is because they have had less of a voice for the history of this country.
Right. Gosh, so true. I appreciate what you said about, and I can't remember the exact words, I just remember the idea, but like, we can all pretty much safely assume that like there is racism within us, right? And so
if you're breathing.
And so I think, I was thinking about this yesterday. It's not enough to say, and I said this in my post, just to say like, I'm not racist. Like, that's unhelpful.
Sure.
It's not enough, a year ago here in where we live in Dayton, there was a KKK rally.
Right.
And so it's not enough to just say like, I'm against that. Like I'm against the KKK. Like, that's not enough. And it's like a relationship. It's like a marriage where you have to continue pursuing your partner. And
it's science.
It's science. And I think you just have to continue to pursue your biases and your blind spots and these things that you're not aware of, because it's so built into our society. And so if we just sort of assume there are things that we don't know, as we talk about in the conversation about science, we'll allow ourselves to continue to grow.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, for me, it comes back to like this idea of evil. And we do not want to acknowledge that evil exists, because if evil exists, it means we have to confront a lot of things. Yeah. And so it's very easy to say, oh, it's the KKK and it's a problem with them, and just make it's the organization of the KKK, not the fact that evil is behind it, right? It's an organization. Or even with abortions, like, oh, it's this, it's this political party, or it's
Right.
this, position, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like, no, evil exists, and it requires that we pursue the eradication of evil equally across the scope of our life.
Yeah.
Using the female body to sell products. See, we can't try to eliminate evil, because if we did, then we wouldn't be allowed to use women and their bodies as breadcrumbs to sell products. When one of the things that Jesus said is that the love of money is the root of all evil. Well, it's very easy for the pursuit of profit to become the love of money. And I just wrote down here, if you look at our food industry, our health industry, and our corrections industry, all of them have been bought and become an object of profit. Now, I'm a business person. Mm-hmm. I know that you have to make a profit to stay in business. One day I'm going to write a book called When Money Was Milk.
Don't share the title. Someone could steal it. Guys, don't steal that.
No, please don't steal it. But here's the point of it. It used to be commerce started off. You walked across to your neighbor and you gave them milk in exchange for them giving you vegetables. Mm-hmm. And that was, you were meeting a need.
Right.
That was the point.
Yep.
Not getting rich, you were meeting a need. And if people become wealthy because they're meeting a lot of needs, fine. That's another thing about our country. We do more humanitarian work across the world than all of the other countries combined. It's not this USA is good, USA is bad. We have to see ourselves as a whole, find the things that we do right and promote them and get more of them, and find the things that need to be corrected and changed, and pursue the eradication of evil. That includes our food system, our health systems, and our corrections systems, mm-hmm. where profit cannot be the pursuit. It has to be people.
Yeah. That's so good. Great title. We will wait with anticipation for your forthcoming book.
Yes, thank you, Mel. I have a quick resource that I want to suggest.
Oh, perfect.
I was talking to a friend on the way in today, and they were telling me about Catherine Schwarzenegger Pratt's book. So Arnold's daughter wrote a book, and we'll put this in the podcast, The Gift of Forgiveness, inspiring stories from those who have overcome the unforgivable. And here's why I think this is relevant. It is maddening, right, to see that video and to see what happened to George Floyd, and that he is a symbol of that happening in other places many more times than we could ever know. Mm-hmm. But we have to be wise that pain and that picture inspires something of positive change in us versus bitterness and unforgiveness. Mm-hmm. The officer is not the point here. The officers are not the point here, because hopefully justice will be served. And I know there's a huge investigation starting, and hopefully justice will be served. But if we make it just about one person or one police department or one specific situation, this will continue to happen over and over and over again. All of us are being invited to pursue health ourselves, and a huge part of health is forgiveness. Yeah. Right? Forgiveness doesn't mean I agree with your actions, right? Forgiveness means I see what you did, I did not like it, but I'm not going to allow it to drag me down or to cause me to retaliate. I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm going to let it be yours. I'll pray for you. I'll pray that justice happens, but I'm going to take this and allow the negative to inspire something positive, so I can be a force for good and I can be a force for light, which is the only way you eradicate evil. You cannot eradicate evil with Roundup or a weed whacker. Mm-hmm. The only way to eradicate evil is through promoting and pursuing light, life, and love.
Yeah. There's another book that I'm going to recommend that I haven't read.
Perfect, Mal. Science and truth, everyone.
But I've heard you talk about it, and it's Malcolm Gladwell's latest book that I think is just relevant in this conversation. Yeah. And I can't remember what it's called.
Communicating with Strangers.
There you go.
Oh, man, the book is so good.
I've seen it referenced in a few articles that I've read about kind of what's just happened lately in Minneapolis. I've seen it referenced. But
I'm going to tell people, don't read it.
Oh.
You need to listen to it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he put
no. Oh,
actually,
other people's voice, right? Yes, you've told me about that.
He disrupted the audio book world.
I love it.
By having the people that he tells story about tell their own story. Listen to it, ladies and gentlemen, and then go back and read it. I think that's it. Episode 18, everyone.
Thanks.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah.